welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game and wonders what it would take for our billionaire owner to give us a massive payout to go away, even though technically we're doing rather well. I'm Kevin Day, and he is Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. It's Newsday, Kieran, and we're recording this on Wednesday, and I know you're anxious to get away to see what you described as a sex pointer in your hilarious WhatsApp message. But obviously, there's only one place we can start, really. It's Chelsea, and Roman Abramovich can afford it, Kieran. But how much is sacking Frank Lampard going to cost him?
Well, I don't think it's actually cost too much, because Lampard had a 2-year contract with an option for the third year. So therefore, there's only 6 months remaining on his contract. He was estimated to be on $8 million a year. So by Abramovich standards, this is actually going to work out quite cheap. It should be only $4 to $5 million.
Oh, okay.
Frank Lampard's team is some of the team will have gone as well. But I got into my big calculator. I got into my spreadsheet and I went through all of the Chelsea accounts since 2003 when Abramovich took over. And he is the classic trophy asset owner in that he can just get rid of these people and it doesn't register on the radar as far as he is concerned. But it's come out as total payoffs of £110 million.
Wow.
For the likes of Mourinho twice, Di Matteo, Conte, Scolari, you name it. And he just does it every time without blinking.
Yeah, and that's how much it costs to get rid of Lampard. I mean, Tuchel's going to be costing him a lot of money, isn't it?
Yeah, he'll be on a big contract, and he's just been sacked himself. So there is this merry-go-round in terms of managerial activity. But I don't see that Abramovich will see it as being a challenge to him. And there's been lots of talk about the Chelsea model, that since Abramovich arrived, they've won more trophies than any other club, despite, I think he's on the 13th manager since 2003, as a means of trying to justify the treatment. But if you take a look at some of the other numbers, Chelsea have spent £500 million more pounds on players in terms of wages and transfers than any other club in the Premier League since Abramovich arrived. And given that they're competing with Manchester United and Manchester City and Liverpool and Arsenal and so on, to be that far ahead of a spend, if you didn't win a stack full of trophies, it would have been absolutely crazy. It's a bit like going into a raffle and there's 20 prizes and you buy 19 of the tickets.
Yeah, do you know what? Much as we love Guy, and we love you, Guy. He's not listening, doesn't we? Can say what we want about him. But I'm actually thinking of asking Roman Abramovich if he fancies buying his own podcast, because it's not a bad business plan, is it really? Because I would love to go into a job knowing that whatever happens, in 2 years' time, I'm going to get sacked with a shed load of money.
I think it's a perfect business plan. I don't know why I don't teach it myself at business school.
Now, can you, Kieran, do me a favour? Because Palace fans won't take it from me. I've tried to tell Palace fans via various media outlets, but those optimistic Palace fans that are saying, well, now's the obvious time for us to get Frank Lampard, can you just break it to them gently that we probably can't afford him?
I think you'd have to come up with a good package. Remember, he did take his first job at Derby County, so I think he is willing to get his feet dirty at a club. Clearly, it won't be too far a journey for him coming into work, so there are positives. But I'm sure when I last checked, you already had a manager.
Yeah, we do. I'm talking about provisionally in case. Yeah, well, again, that's another of the social media discussions last night, Kieran, because as you'll guess, there are certain elements of the Palace support that think we should have a different manager. And there's quite a few of them said, I'd rather have Christine Lampard than the current manager we do have. Abramovich, we half-jokingly say that Abramovich can afford, of course, to sack managers. Conversely, are there clubs in the Premier League that can't afford to do that, Kieran? And I'm thinking specifically of Newcastle, most of whose fans, I guess, would happily see the back of Steve Bruce. But is that a club where they simply can't afford to spend the sort of money it would take to A, get rid of him, and B, bring in a new manager?
I don't think so. I think Mike Ashley, who is a very shrewd guy, has realised that because Steve Bruce is so unpopular on Tyneside, that he takes all the flack. He's actually taking a lot of the heat that should really be going at Mike Ashley. So Mike Ashley is using Steve Bruce as a glorified airbag in order to. So he's not too bothered, provided they don't go down. And Mike Ashley will be perfectly happy with 17th. They're not investing huge sums in the squad. They're still getting the TV money from the Premier League. From his point of view, that business model works quite well.
The Bank of England, Kieran, as we know, have been splashing money about left, right and centre to anybody who asks for it seems. And the EFL are the latest football organisation in talks to borrow from the Bank of England, from specifically their COVID lending facility.
Yes, this one's a strange one, because if you go into the Bank of England website and look at the details as to who qualifies, it's got to be a company which has a good reputation. It's got to have proven itself financially, historically. It's got to be protecting jobs, and the EFL directly doesn't seem to qualify on this basis, because all it does, it acts as a collecting house. It gets the money from the TV deal, it gets the money from the Premier League in the form of solidarity payments, and then it doles it out. So, given that the clubs in the Championship and quite a few in the rest of the EFL historically have lost money hand over fist, I'm not sure how it would qualify as being a low risk lend to organisations which have proven themselves to be financially secure pre-COVID. But sort of delving into this a little bit further, it could be that what the EFL will do is to use the Premier League itself and the Premier League's guarantee of payments from the Premier League TV deal, which filters through to the EFL in what we refer to as solidarity payments, and possibly parachute payments as well, and say, well, look, the money's definitely going to come in, and a bit like the way that some of the lenders, in terms of, we've seen the likes of Leicester and Southampton and so on, have said, we will guarantee you the TV money as soon as it's received by us. The EFL will do that with the solidarity payments, and then the Premier League will pay the interest. So, it's a weird one. My gut reaction is that it didn't seem to be the purpose of the COVID loans, but as we've seen with many issues to do with COVID and the way that money's been distributed, it doesn't necessarily go to where you thought it would originally do so.
I've tried that argument with NatWest. The money's coming in. You might as well be talking to Mount Rushmore. Basically, it's like nothing. Really, I really would not play poker with my chap at NatWest Bank. He's got a hard Zoom face. You sort of answered this, Kieran, but one of the backup questions I wrote last night is: it must be harder for a league than a club to borrow money, because, as you say, it's a very strange corporate identity, isn't it? Like, basically, you're lending the money to 72 different members of this club, aren't you, in a sense?
Yes. I guess the only advantage is the way that the EFL operates is that it is a collecting house. And if the Bank of England says, well, from whom are you collecting the money? And they're collecting the money from the Premier League, which in turn is collecting the money from Sky and BT and Amazon, who are pretty blue chip, then the Bank of England might take a more relaxed approach. The problem is if the EFL doesn't borrow from the Bank of England, and I think the Bank of England is lending at 0.5%, does it then go to the likes of Macquarie and MSD, who are owned by Michael Dell's organisation, who are lending at much higher rates? And that means the Premier League, which appears to be operating sort of as the bank of mum and dad in the sense that it's guaranteed to pay the interest on the loans, it ends up having to pay out more money, because the Bank of England won't lend at 0% or close to 0%, and instead you have to go to these other borrowers who are lending at 9, 10 and 11.
And what do the EFL say? I mean, I imagine it's a much more complicated process. It's not just a piece of paper that you download with a couple of questions, but there will be somewhere along the line somebody asking the question, what is the purpose of this loan? What do the EFL say? Tiding us over? Helping all the clubs? And what are they asking for the money for?
Well, the COVID loan criteria is that the money is to cover loss of revenues directly as a result of COVID. So clearly football clubs who are having to pay their employees whilst at the same time they're unable to generate money through one of their key revenue earners, which is the turnstiles. I think they would qualify on that basis if the EFL can go to the Bank of England and say, well, this is the rationale behind it. And remember, the Bank of England has already lent to Spurs, to Arsenal, and to the Football Association itself. And what does the Football Association do? It hosts some matches at Wembley and chooses the colour for the England shirt. And those three between them have borrowed $470 million.
Yeah, you would hope that the EFL gets the money if it helps clubs to survive this. But we know from experience, Kieran, and what we're almost guaranteed, as we saw in the National League, is an almighty row over how the money's distributed anyway, isn't it? So we'll keep an eye on that one. Yeah. Now, this next story seems to have infuriated Twitter. Let's face it, that takes a lot of doing. Wow, it takes a lot to get Twitter worked up, doesn't it? The president of Fenerbahce has asked fans to help fund Mesut Ozil's £13 million salary. He's asking the wrong fans. You should probably ask Arsenal fans. You'd make a lot more. But as Twitter points out, Kieran, this looks like a club buying a player who they simply couldn't afford to buy and pay wages to.
Yes, Fenerbahce are currently £460 million in debt.
Whoa.
So under those circumstances, you would normally look to cut your outgoings. Instead, Ozil has been released from his contract. Now, I'm assuming here that there's going to be some form of payoff from Arsenal, that they're going to pay. They say, we'll give you 80% of your wages and sod off. And that way we're going to save a bit of money, given that he was on £18 million a year. He's only 6 months of his contract remaining. If they can save themselves $1 million or $2 with a partial payment, then that's fine. He's going to be on a fraction of his Arsenal wage if the figures in the press are correct. The papers are saying that he's only going to be earning £3.5 million a year. Let's face it, Kevin, you and I, we wouldn't get out of bed for that. So you can understand there's an element of sympathy there.
I generally don't think I could get by on that, Kieran, to be honest.
No.
I really don't. How Guy manages on just the £4 million a year is beyond me, frankly.
So what Fenerbahce have done, and the interest in Ozil was absolutely staggering. That they quoted that they were signing him, and then some Turkish Fenerbahce fans managed to identify the private aeroplane that he was on. and as you know, these websites where you can actually track individual flights. Well, they were doing it. It's a bit like on Christmas Eve when you can follow Santa Claus, delivering presents to all the good boys and girls as he goes across the planet. And it was huge interest. And now what Fenerbahce have done, and you've got to admire this in terms of barefaced cheek, they've said that can fans text in financial support at £2 a pop?
Wow.
Which is staggering. I mean, Fenerbahce has incredible support, not only locally but also internationally, as many Turkish clubs do. But to ask the fans who already they will have bought merchandise, they will have paid for their TV subscriptions to be contributing towards a player's wage. As you correctly suggested at the beginning of this conversation, why did they sign him in the first place if they're not confident of being able to pay the wages?
I have nothing but admiration for Turkish football fans, especially since Graham Souness once told me that the only people he was scared of was Turkish football fans. And he told us a couple of stories that indicate that he was probably right to as well. We all made a mental note: do not upset Turkish football fans. Kieran, we love an optimist on this show. Well, we just love an optimist. So hats off to the chief executive of QPR, who has sent a letter to fellow Championship clubs in an attempt to cut their £42 million FFP fine. Now that is optimistic. Sending a letter is optimistic for a start. Now, I got a Christmas card this morning, so why he's sending a letter, I don't know. But it does seem that is that £42 million right? Is that the size of the fine? I should have queried that because it seemed huge as I was writing it down.
Well, it's a £42 million settlement.
Oh, okay.
So we have to be a little bit careful because at the time there was a lot of shock and people were saying, and just to give some of the backstory, Queen's Park Rangers were relegated from the Premier League in 2013, and under normal circumstances you'd look to sell players, cut wages, and so on. But instead, they said, well, sod that for a game of soldiers. And in 2013-14, they qualified via the playoffs. Bobby Zamora, ex of my parish, of course, scored the winning goal. Should we mention the name of the side that they beat?
Let's not.
Let's not. Yes,
let's not. Just. Oh no, actually, there's going to be an oblique reference to them in the next question anyway. So yeah, it is Derby County. Yeah.
It is Derby County. When QPR published their accounts, they paid out 75 million quid in wages that season, which was 195% of revenue. The second highest was 41 million. So they just completely obliterated any form of competitive balance in terms of wages being paid. They retained their staff, they went back up, and the EFL weren't happy. And one of the things that they did, which they claimed to be within the rules, was that the owners were owed money by QPR, and the owners said, well, you don't have to pay us back. And QPR said, thanks very much. We're going to treat that money that the owners aren't asking for us back. We're going to treat that in the same way as pie sales. And they just added it effectively to revenue. And in their books, they qualified for FFP. So there was then a 4-year tiff between the EFL and Queen's Park Rangers. And Les Hughes, who is the QPR chief executive, he said, we didn't use creative accounting. Well, actually, they did use creative accounting. We were cooperative. We didn't try to drag out proceedings. So, well, if they did not try to drag out proceedings, why did it drag out over 4 years? So, his claim that they've been treated too harshly. And then he said, Manchester City and PSG and Inter Milan, they got off easily. Well, Manchester City and PSG both actually had to pay pretty big fines. They had squad reduction sizes for the Champions League and things of this nature. So going back to that £42 million, one of the laughable things was that there were still outstanding loans from the owners, and the EFL said, right, as part of the punishment, more of the loans, which are never going to be repaid, you have to treat them as not going to be repaid. So it was a bit like me giving one of my kids a deposit to buy their first house. And saying, repay me when you can afford to do so, in the knowledge that I will be 6 feet underground before they even get to think about doing something of that nature. QPR, they were given a £17 million fine, but that £17 million fine will not be fully settled until 2028. So when you work out its capital value, i.e., £17 million in 2028 isn't the same as £17 million in 2014 when the offence occurred. It works out about £9.5 million, and then they're also moaning, we've had to go and pay £3 million in legal costs. Well, if you hadn't appealed, if you hadn't dragged this out for 4 years, it wouldn't have cost you £3 million in legal costs. So the settlement was never £42 million. A lot of it was self-inflicted, and a lot of it was just accounting sleight of hand. So I've never had a lot of sympathy for them because, of course, upon being promoted, they got another year of Premier League TV money, And because it was 2014, they then get 3 to 4 years of parachute payments. So they made well over £150 million in terms of the benefits. So I can't see the logic behind Lee Hoos saying we've been treated harshly.
When you say, Kieran, it won't be settled in full till 2028, is that because they're paying it in instalments, or is there right? Okay, so what do they hope to achieve then by sending a letter to fellow Championship clubs? And as we know, football clubs haven't been particularly sympathetic to other clubs that are in any sort of financial problem recently.
I think they're saying that because there has been a change of ownership, because a bit like Roman Abramovich with Chelsea, they had owners who treated Queen's Park Rangers as a trophy asset, as a means of showing off their wealth, entertaining their friends and things of this nature. And there was a really good documentary I remember seeing a few years ago about the nature of the owners. It was a cracking watch.
Yeah.
They sort of then lost interest. They said, well, we're not willing to put any more money into the club, which meant that in the last few years, and again, I do give credit to Lee Hoos, the club has been run on a pretty even keel by Championship standards. Championship standards are not normal business standards. So they have certainly cut back in terms of expenditure, and they're saying, well, look, we're reformed characters over the course of the last 2 or 3 years. Sir Les has become involved as well, and I'm a huge fan of Sir Les. Therefore, can you cut us a bit of slack? And the reaction from other clubs was sort of a very quick raspberry, and when there was a meeting, I think the conversation was described as terse. Now, I've had terse conversations with ex-girlfriends, and they've never ended well.
At least they ended. So there you go. I feel I should point out that the Sir Les you're talking about there is Les Ferdinand, of course, in case some of our more elderly listeners think that you're referring to the great Barry Humphries character, Sir Les Patterson, I would love to see Les Patterson running a football club. Google it, kids. We were hoping not to mention our friends in the East Midlands today. We have done accidentally, but our friends in North West Greater Manchester do unfortunately get a mention. That's Wigan, of course. And the administrators at Wigan now estimate their fees will be 1.65 million, rising to 2.2 million if there's a successful sale. I always worry, Kieran, when accountants use the word estimate, because I'm guessing that it will end up being at the top end of the estimate.
Yes, the administrators published their latest report, so that went out on Companies House, and as you rightly said, initially they were looking they estimated their charges. Remember, this doesn't include legal charges and surveyors' charges and estate agents' charges. They estimated their fees to on a time basis to be around about £1.1 million. And that was working out as around about £380, £390 per hour, which is quite steep. And the Wigan sale collapsed. Now, the administrators had given a potential owner exclusivity. Now, if I was doing that, I'd take a huge deposit. If somebody wants exclusive rights, then I would ask them to pay me a sum of money along the lines of, if you walk away from the deal, you'll feel it. It will sting you. But one can only presume that they've not done that, because the prospective owners did walk away from the deal, which means that now they've got to go and circulate the sale again. And we have spoken about some of the parties who we're aware of who are interested. But on the back of that, the administrators are saying, well, because we didn't manage to sell the club the first time round, it's going to involve us with extra time, and therefore our fees are going to go up by £500,000. And if we do sell the club, as opposed to just selling players and the training ground, our fees, we say that they're going to go up by a third, which means that they could go over £2 million. Now, if you're selling a house, you agree a commission with a estate agent, and if it takes 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, just because the estate agent fails to sell the house, they don't then come back and say, "Oh, sorry, mate, the buyer pulled out. It's going to cost you an extra, 20 grand for me to find you another buyer." So it does seem that the administrators are very much having it on their terms. They would argue that they need particular unique skills to sell a football club. My experience is that every business is unique, so therefore you don't need to claim that you're the only kids in town when it comes to selling a football club. The administrators are also saying that the money is being paid by Al Young, or sort of intimating that Al Young was effectively funding the sale. But that doesn't seem to follow either. And the big losers here are going to be the unsecured creditors. Now, if Wigan, if the Wigan administrators pay a dividend of less than 25%, Wigan will get a further 15% penalty. So they seem to have set a bar as if we take out 2.2 million, we can still pay 25%. But if they sold the club and took a lower fee themselves, then the unsecured creditors, who are the honest, trusting creditors of Wigan, might get more than 25%. So I do think that these sums seem very, very high indeed.
Sorry, when you said 15% penalty, did you mean 15-point penalty? Or
15-point penalty, yes.
Oh, well, good. Sorry, I've been doing jury service, Kieran, so I'm all over points of detail, points of. But of course, the administrators, of course, get paid if they don't sell the club, don't they? Eventually, if the club, God forbid, goes into receivership, the administrator or whatever the next step is, the administrators will still get their. I nearly said pound of flesh, but that wouldn't be fair, would it?
Well, the administrators, to be fair, they do take on an element of risk when you accept an appointment, in the sense that if you don't sell any of the assets, then you can't take anything out of the business because there's nobody else to pay you. But this would be. There's no risk from the administrator's point of view because they've sold players for 9 million. They've sold the training ground to Preston North End, and now they've got the club in itself in the form of the stadium and the remaining facilities. So it was very low risk in terms of them not getting paid, and they have been saying, people don't understand if we don't sell anything, we don't get paid. Well, if you've got a lot of talented footballers, you've got some prime property in the Northwest. And you've got a business which is in an industry which attracts an awful lot of interest. If you can't sell any of those assets, you shouldn't be in the business in the first place.
Before we move on, Kieran, I said there was no Derby news. I'm just checking there is no Derby news because I noticed there are a couple of almost dark muttering tweets that you sent implying that there might be some Derby news coming up soon.
No, the only Derby news is that it looks as if Wayne Rooney is taking a pay deferral to allow the other members of staff to be paid. So credit to him for doing that. He didn't have to. And the noise is coming out that Derby will now have will have paid their December pay packets in full. Appeared to be. That appeared to be the other sort of bits and pieces. So it's actually, I think, for once, pretty good news from a Derby perspective, and from the point of view of an independent fan, I hope there's lots more good news and that they find themselves some new owners and they can just get certainty. The stories that have been doing the rounds haven't been particularly glowing. And some of the documents which have been forwarded to me have been from vested interests, and I can't really say more than that at this stage. Okay. Vested interests who I don't think necessarily have Derby County's best long-term interests at heart.
All right, well let's leave it there and say it's good news. Anyway, they've paid December's wages. Excellent. Now, Kieran, I'm sure you can imagine that I enjoyed many a playful text and WhatsApp message from West Ham fans last night. Turns out I've got a lot more friends who support West Ham than I thought. And I admit, I'm not proud of this, reduced to having to say, well, at least my club's not run by pornographers, but they trumped me by saying we've got 13 more points than you have. And frankly, I'd rather have the points than the moral high ground. But if I'd known this was coming up, I could have said, well, you're not getting as much money for Sebastian Haller as you thought you would. So take that and take your 3 points back to East London with you. Stick that
which, to be fair, they did.
Yeah, stick that in your pornographic pipe and smoke it. So they're not getting quite as much of the £20 million transfer fee that Ajax paid for Sebastian Haller as they hoped.
No, we've established that in modern football, most deals are on credit, and this is actually one of the issues which has sort of been raised by some of the listeners. West Ham bought Sebastian Haller for an estimated £45 million in the summer of 2019. I think it's fair to say it's not been a glowing 18-month career.
No.
And they've sold him for 20 million. So they were taking a bit of a hammering from that. But it turns out that they were buying Haller on instalments. And therefore, when they've sold him to Ajax, it looks as if some of the money from Ajax will actually end up in the hands of Eintracht Frankfurt, who they bought Sebastian Haller from. And it then turns out that Eintracht Frankfurt, again, had taken the IOUs from West Ham and they'd sold them on to somebody else. So you end up with these sort of daisy chains of transactions. And my concern in respect of issues of this nature is that if you've got a long daisy chain, it only takes one party to fail to make a payment on time. And there have been stories that West Ham didn't pay the instalment that was due on Haller this summer, that things could have a bit of a domino effect in European football. Now, there's no evidence of anything of that nature taking place in respect of West Ham. They're doing really well at present. David Moyes has clearly has done a very good job this season. And I know West Ham fans are sort of itching to see the proceeds of the sale of Sebastian Haller get reinvested in expanding the squad, but they're not going to get the 20 million because they're going to have to go and pay some of it across to Eintracht Frankfurt's IOU people. But also, I went into the small print of West Ham's accounts, and before they signed Haller, they had outstanding creditors in respect of players of 87 million. I know that the owners have put money into the club. Now, whether that's at an interest rate or not, we don't yet know. And they've borrowed from other sources. So they have had a pretty tough time financially, although on the pitch, they're doing extremely well.
Yeah, all right. Don't worry about it. Otherwise, you'll be getting messages from me if you lose to Fulham tonight.
I'd expect that anyway.
Nah, you'll be fine with your 6 points. You'll come away with the 6 points, don't worry. I didn't even know, Kieran, that San Francisco 49ers had a stake in Leeds United, but not only do they have a stake, they've increased it to 37%.
Yes, this was very weird. I think they originally bought 9.9%, then they increased it to 15% a couple of years ago, and they paid relatively low amounts because they originally invested in Leeds United when the club was in the Championship, and therefore the club was estimated to be valued at around about 80 to 100 million pounds. If the stories are true, I mean, certainly the increase, they bought a further 22% for around about £50 million. So that values Leeds at around about 260, 270 million. And that ties in with my estimates, because if you think that Burnley went for 200 and Newcastle, who've been more established in the Premier League, are going for 300, you'd expect Leeds to be closer to the Newcastle value than that of Burnley, because they've got bigger ground capacity, they've got more of an international support base, and so on. But the logic behind the San Francisco 49ers investment, this is a curious one. SF49 is a very successful brand in the United States. It is successful from a financial perspective. And I think what San Francisco 49 see in Leeds United is a club with a lot of potential, but that it needs cash invested now to start to realise that potential. Because before Radrizzani, who's the present owner, came into Leeds, the club was subject to, I think it's fair to say, a game of pass the parcel through by a series of owners who were just looking to make a quick buck. And some of those owners even claimed that they didn't own the club when they did own the club, and it was a lot of head scratching taking place. But the trouble is, if you're only going to buy a football club for a year or two and try to sell it on at a profit, the first thing that you do is that you cut back on spending on the stadium and the training facilities and things of that nature, because your attitude is, I'll let the next sucker pay for those costs. Now, what San Francisco 49ers have said, we're in this for a longer haul. We think that we can use our commercial nous to make Leeds a bit of a name in the US, pre-season tours, things of that nature, to try to get more of a horrible word, a digitization form of monetization of the club, i.e. to get fans who are not living in the close vicinity to buy more and invest more and to get involved more with the club. So therefore it picks up more details about them. And San Francisco are, they're very smart cookies. So this is an intriguing investment. Mr. Radrizzani still retains control. He believes that Leeds could be worth £1 billion in a few years' time. But for me, that begs the question, well, if you think it's to be worth £1 billion in a few years' time, why are you selling 22%, valuing it at 250 million now? So I suspect it's due to the fact that he's not got the cash to take Leeds to a competitive level. I know they're keen to break into the top six, whereas the money from the San Francisco 49ers, it could be used for investment on the pitch and also to make Elland Road, which has got 20,000 season tickets that they can't sell because demand exceeds supply. If they could revamp the stadium so it goes from being a 37 to a 38,000 capacity to somewhere close to 60,000, that's going to make them more competitive in the medium term.
Yeah, or the San Francisco 49ers could do what the American co-owners of Palace did, which is promise an awful lot of money and then virtually disappear a year later, essentially.
Yes.
Well, where are they? It's hard to track down those people. We'll get Guy onto the case. Now, you mentioned that West Ham had some transfer creditors. They're not the only ones, because Barcelona's latest accounts show that the club owes €174 million, I believe that would be, in transfer fees to 19 clubs. Is that because they haven't paid or because those transfer deals include payment over several years?
It's because it is on an instalment basis, but it does look as if Barcelona have been buying players on tick. That is common in the game, and normally you say, well, it's not an issue because we're making a lot of money from ticket sales. We've got a club which is open 7 days a week, and Barcelona, if anybody's ever been there, it's got the stadium tours, the museum, and so on, attracts an awful lot of traffic on non-match days, and this is something which I think clubs are trying to work on more and more. I was talking to somebody at a club last week who said that his family, there's some Spurs fans in it, so he thought I'll take them to the new stadium. This was pre-lockdown where we are at present. This was when they started to reduce some of the restrictions on movement. And he said, well, we got there. We thought, we'll do the roof tour, because you can walk across the roof. And then by the time from there, it takes you directly. And this is the Disneyfication of football. It takes you, when you finish the roof tour, you end up, the exit, you have to go through the megastore.
Yeah.
And in the megastore, they've got the photographs of you on the roof. So, of course, you end up buying those. Yeah. So, this is, Alton Towers do this, Disney do it. So it is showing that some clubs are trying to sweat the assets, which I know is a phrase that us football romantics don't like. But, and this guy said, well, by the time I'd done all that, I was £250 out of pocket. Yeah. On a non-match day.
Yeah.
And this is what Barcelona have been very good at doing historically, because it is an iconic stadium and they're very good at things of that nature. None of that money's coming in. They are more reliant upon ticket sales than clubs in the Premier League. And as well as having money outstanding in transfers, they owe £730 million in short-term debt. So some of the press comments say, well, does this mean that Barcelona are going to go bust? Yet my viewpoint is, do you want to be the bank manager who phones up Barcelona to call in the loans? Because but the Barcelona fan base, which is huge, is going to weaponize against that bank. So if that's Santander, every Barcelona fan is going to take their custom away from Santander. So I don't think that Barcelona are going to go bust. That they certainly have made efforts to cut back on their wages. And they're trying to come to some form of arrangement with some of their lenders, but they are in a pretty sticky wicket, as are Real Madrid, and as is practically every club in France, with the exception of PSG, because the French TV deal is making no progress, and they're really suffering at present. They're having to borrow from the French government.
A couple of seasons ago, a friend of mine, Palace season ticket holder, visited the Palace trophy room and the Barcelona trophy room on consecutive days. And sent for, to be honest, Kieran, even with the red and blue striped shirts, it was very easy to tell the difference between them. It didn't take us a long time to work out which one he was in on any particular time. Dundee United fans have voted overwhelmingly to, and I believe the official accounting term is, bung the club some money.
Yes, that is the official term. Yeah. Hats off to everybody in the Dundee United Supporters Foundation. They gave the club, I think, £100,000 in June 2020. Scottish football is struggling, as is all forms of football. And remember that the Scottish TV deal is pretty minor compared to what we see in the Premier League, even compared to what we see in the Championship. So there's not a lot of money coming in. The manager, the superbly named Mickey Mellon, has taken a pay cut. The players have taken pay cuts as well. But the club has still gone to the fans and said, is there any way that you can help? So the Supporters Foundation held a vote. I think 92% of people voted. Nearly 99% of people said, yes, let's help. Yeah, it's our club. We want there to be a Dundee United. So therefore, they found £60,000 immediately, and they're going to do a load of fundraisers, a lot online, a lot via subscription, to try to give another £40,000 to the club over the course of the next few months. And my hat is just firmly doffed in their direction. This is the sign of this is an act of love. Yeah, this is the nature of the relationship that we have with our football clubs, and the fact that the players and the managers have made sacrifices. I think fans have acknowledged that, and they said, well, we will try to make sacrifices and provide financial support as well.
Yeah, normally I get quite nervous when you use the phrase "act of love," but in this situation, it's probably the only phrase you can use. And that is a very good story. And if any Dundee United fans are listening, and there's anything we can do to help or help publicise, and of course we will do that. Our final story, Kieran, and it gives me no pleasure to say this, but your club, the Seaweed, made a big financial loss last season.
Yes. Our results came out at 10:30 on a Tuesday night, which I thought was a song by The Cure. But they came out on Tuesday night, and the cost of getting to the Premier League is eye-watering, as we know, because you've unless you have some good loan signings or some really good players coming through the academy, it's going to cost you a lot of money. But staying there is also proving to be pretty expensive as well. So, Brighton lost £67 million in 2020, of which around about 25 million they're saying was due to COVID. So therefore, it was still losing 800 grand a week, regardless of COVID. And that appears to be sort of broadly par for the course from what we're seeing. Southampton have lost over 70. Spurs, who have got that amazing stadium. And remember, they had that amazing stadium open for 3/4 of the season.
Yeah.
They lost a load of money, and they were in the Champions League as well. Everton lost over 100 million. And it just goes to show that the belief that the Premier League is paved with gold is actually a myth. Once you get there, unless you do a Norwich and just say, well, we got to the Premier League, we're not going to spend any money on players, isn't it fun? And accept that you're going to go down. If you do want to stay up, then it does become a pretty costly exercise, unless your name is Burnley, who every year manage to pull out a profit. And as I've said to you on more than one occasion, in my view, historically they've been the best run club in the history of the Premier League in terms of being a provincial club. And I did do some sums which showed that since the Premier League started, Burnley are 5th in the profit table.
Wow.
So you think of all the big clubs that have been there, and for Burnley, who have only been there for a few seasons, to have made the 5th highest profits in the history of the Premier League is testament to the way that club has been run from a financial point of view. And I appreciate there are other views about what the priorities should be.
Yeah, do you know what, Kieran? When we have a quiet news week, and please God we will one day eventually have a quiet news week, we should actually spend some time investigating why Burnley have been so efficient and so successful, because it does make you wonder why other clubs don't follow their example. But we have no time for that now, because I have to let you go to watch your sex pointer. You've just got time to have, I imagine, what would be partridge, grouse, this cold January evening. What are you having for, or have you had your tea yet, Kieran?
No. I've made some homemade soup.
Nice.
It's mushroom and leek with the Chinese mushroom powder to sprinkle on the top. So it's very nice. It does go down well, and with a little bit of ciabatta, of course, to go with it.
Lovely, right.
And I'm looking forward to it.
You've got umami written all over that, haven't you? You've really gone heavy on the umami flavours there. We won't do anything other than say. That's easy for me to say. Stay safe, because you've got to rush off. So if you have any questions for our next pod, which will be on Monday, which of course is all about questions on any aspect of football finance, whether it's non-league football, Sunday league football, or Barcelona or FIFA, whoever else, it's questions@priceoffootball.com. In the meantime, it behoves me to say good luck to Fulham tonight. I hope you lose 6-0, Kieran.
I would be gutted if you said anything else.
Good, of course you would. It's only banter, isn't it? It's just banter, Your Honour.
We're all lads together. Yeah.
See you soon, everybody.
Bye.
The price of football. The price of football.